When I walked into that marble-floored mansion wearing my Walmart dress and carried that homemade casserole, I had no idea I was about to teach the wealthiest family in Connecticut the most expensive lesson of their lives. The moment my future daughter-in-law's mother looked at my worn shoes and whispered something to her husband, I knew exactly what game we were playing. What they didn't know was that I'd been playing it far longer than they'd been alive. My name is Veronica, and I've spent the last 30 years building an empire so quietly that even my own son didn't know the truth. But let me start at the beginning because this story isn't just about money or revenge. It's about the masks we wear, and the moment we decide to take them off. 6 months before that dinner party, my son Ethan came home with stars in his eyes. He was 28, a software engineer with a good heart and his father's trusting nature. I was sitting in my small kitchen, the one I'd kept exactly as it was since my husband died 15 years ago, when he burst through the door with news that would change everything. "Mom, I met someone," he said, his face glowing with that particular kind of joy that only new love brings. "Her name is Vivian, and she's incredible. Smart, beautiful, kind. Everything I've ever wanted." I smiled and hugged him, feeling that familiar ache in my chest. My boy, my beautiful boy, all grown up and falling in love. I was genuinely happy for him. But there was something in his voice, a nervous edge that made me pay closer attention. Over the next few weeks, I learned more about Vivian. She came from old money, the kind of wealth that whispers rather than shouts. Her father, Lawrence Blackwood, owned half the commercial real estate in Hartford. Her mother, Constance, sat on the boards of museums and orchestras. They lived in an estate that had been featured in Architectural Digest. "They want to meet you, Mom," Ethan said one evening, and I saw the worry flicker across his face. "They're having a dinner party next month. Vivian says it's important to them." "Of course, sweetheart," I replied, stirring the pot of soup on my old gas stove. "I'd love to meet them." But I saw something else in his eyes. Embarrassment? Anxiety? He looked around our modest home. The faded wallpaper I'd never replaced, the second-hand furniture I'd collected over decades, the linoleum floor with the crack by the refrigerator. "Mom, about the dinner. Vivian's family is, well, they're different from us. They're very formal, very traditional. Are you worried they won't approve of me?" I asked gently. He didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was small. "I just want everything to be perfect. I love her so much, Mom. And I love you. I want everyone to get along." That night, after Ethan left, I sat alone in my kitchen and thought about the choice ahead of me. You see, my son didn't know the truth about our finances. He didn't know about the investment portfolio worth $43 million. He didn't know about the commercial properties I owned in 6 states. He didn't know that the insurance job I'd held for 30 years had actually been executive positions at 3 different Fortune 500 companies, or that I'd retired at 50 with enough money to fund a small country. When my husband Daniel died, he left us with medical debt that would have crushed most families. Ethan was only 13, vulnerable and grieving. I made a decision then that I've never regretted. I would keep him grounded in reality, teach him the value of hard work and humility, and shield him from the corrupting influence of wealth until he was mature enough to handle it. So I lived modestly. I drove an old Honda. I shopped at thrift stores and clipped coupons. I worked my way up through the corporate world while pretending to be just another middle management employee. And every penny I didn't spend on maintaining appearances, I invested. My husband had been a financial advisor before he got sick, and he taught me well. The money grew, and grew, and grew. But Ethan never knew. He went to public school, worked part-time jobs through college, learned to budget and save. He became exactly the kind of man his father would have been proud of, humble, hardworking, genuine. And I was proud too, even though sometimes it hurt to watch him struggle with student loans when I could have paid them off with pocket change. Now, sitting in my small kitchen, I had to make another choice. I could reveal the truth before this dinner party, show up in designer clothes and expensive jewelry, prove to the Blackwoods that I was their equal or better. Or I could do something far more interesting. I could test them. Over the years, I'd met plenty of wealthy families. I'd sat in boardrooms with billionaires and negotiated deals worth hundreds of millions. I'd learned to read people, to see past their polished surfaces to the truth underneath. And I'd learned that money, real old money, doesn't need to prove itself. But new attitudes about money, insecurity dressed up as superiority, always reveal themselves when confronted with someone they think is beneath them. I wanted to know who Vivian's family really was. More importantly, I wanted to know who Vivian really was. Did she love my son for himself, or was she slumming it, playing at normal life before returning to her gilded cage? And if her family looked down on me, would she defend us, or would she join them in their judgment? The only way to find out was to give them exactly what they expected to see. The invitation arrived 2 weeks later, embossed and formal. Mr. and Mrs. Lawrence Blackwood request the pleasure of your company for dinner at Blackwood Manor. The date was set. My costume was chosen. The stage was prepared. I told Ethan I was excited to meet Vivian's family. I asked what I should bring, what I should wear. He was relieved that I seemed so calm about it all, so unintimidated. He suggested I dress nicely, but don't worry too much about it, Mom. Just be yourself. Just be myself. If only he knew which version of myself I'd decided to be. The day of the dinner, I went through my closet carefully. Not my real closet, the one in my actual home, the penthouse condo I owned under an LLC in downtown Hartford, filled with Chanel and Hermes and custom Italian pieces. No, I went through the closet in this small house, the one with clothes from Target and Walmart, dresses that were clean and neat but clearly inexpensive. I chose a floral print dress that had cost $19. I paired it with shoes I'd bought at a discount store 5 years ago. I did my hair simply, with the kind of home dye job that doesn't quite match the roots. I put on the minimum of makeup and my wedding ring, the original one, not the upgraded version I could have afforded. Then I made a casserole. Green bean casserole, the kind you make with canned soup and fried onions from a bag. I put it in an old Pyrex dish with a crack along one side and covered it with aluminum foil. When Ethan picked me up, his face did something complicated. Pride and love warred with something else, maybe embarrassment, maybe worry. But he hugged me tight and told me I looked nice. And I could hear him trying to convince himself that everything would be fine. The drive to Blackwood Manor took 40 minutes. We left the city and headed into the countryside, where the houses got bigger and farther apart, where stone walls and iron gates marked the boundaries of estates rather than properties. When we finally turned onto their private drive, I had to suppress a smile. The driveway alone was longer than my street. The house mansion really was everything I'd expected. Colonial Revival architecture, white columns, black shutters, perfectly manicured grounds. It was beautiful in that coldly perfect way that requires an army of staff to maintain. As we pulled up, I could see figures through the huge windows, people in cocktail attire holding crystal glasses. Mom, Ethan said quietly, putting the car in park. I need to tell you something. I looked at him, this man I'd raised, and saw a boy again. Nervous, protective, worried. Vivian's mother can be a little particular. And her father is very old school. Some of their friends will be here too. I just want you to know that no matter what happens, no matter what anyone says, I'm proud to be your son. I'm proud of you. My heart broke and swelled at the same time. He was trying to prepare me for their judgment, trying to shield me from their potential snobbery. He had no idea that I'd faced down boardrooms full of men who thought a woman couldn't possibly understand finance, that I'd negotiated with people who made the Blackwoods look like middle class. Thank you, sweetheart, I said, patting his hand. I'll be just fine. I promise. We walked up the stone steps together, me clutching my cracked Pyrex dish, him squaring his shoulders like he was preparing for battle. The door opened before we could knock, and an actual butler, they had an actual butler, ushered us inside. The foyer was all marble and crystal, with a chandelier that probably cost more than most people's houses. A grand staircase swept upward to the second floor. Fresh flowers in enormous arrangements perfumed the air. And there, descending the stairs like she was making an entrance in a movie, was Vivian. She was beautiful, I'll give her that. Blonde hair in perfect waves, designer dress that fit like it had been made for her body specifically, jewelry that was tasteful but clearly expensive. She smiled when she saw Ethan, and I watched carefully to see if that smile was real. It was. Thank God it was real. Her whole face lit up when she looked at my son, and she moved toward him with genuine affection. That was the first test passed. Then she turned to me, and I watched her take in my appearance. The discount dress. The worn shoes. The cracked casserole dish. Something flickered across her face, surprise, maybe discomfort, but she recovered quickly and smiled. Mrs. Patterson, she said warmly, reaching out to take my free hand. It's so wonderful to finally meet you. Ethan has told me so much about you. Please call me Veronica, I said, making my voice just a little uncertain, a little nervous. And I hope he didn't tell you too much. I'd hate for you to know all my secrets before we've even shared a meal. She laughed, but I saw her glance at the casserole dish again. Is that for dinner? How thoughtful. Let me take that to the kitchen for you. Before I could respond, another voice cut through the foyer. Vivian, darling, bring our guests to the sitting room. The Ashfords have just arrived. Constance Blackwood appeared from a doorway to the left. She was exactly what I'd pictured. 60 years old but fighting it with everything money could buy, dressed in what I recognized as a St. John knit suit, pearls at her throat, hair styled within an inch of its life. Her eyes swept over me once, cataloging everything, and I saw her verdict written in the slight tightening of her mouth. Poor. Common. Unsuitable. Perfect. Mother, this is Ethan's mother, Veronica Patterson, Vivian said, and I caught the slight emphasis on Ethan's mother, as if she was trying to remind her mother to be polite. How lovely, Constance said, extending her hand but not quite meeting my eyes. Her handshake was brief, her fingers barely touching mine. Welcome to our home. Please do come in. We have some other guests I'd like you to meet. The sitting room was full of people who all looked vaguely the same. Expensive clothes, expensive jewelry, expensive faces with expensive smiles. Constance led me around, introducing me to couples whose names I immediately recognized. The Ashfords owned a hedge fund. The Montgomerys were in pharmaceuticals. The Worthingtons had made their money in shipping 3 generations ago, and had been living off it ever since. And this is Veronica Patterson, Constance said each time, her voice doing something subtle that I'd heard 1,000 times before. That particular tone that wealthy people use when introducing someone they consider beneath them, but are too well-bred to openly insult. Ethan's mother. She's from. Where did you say you were from, dear? Just here in Connecticut, I said, making my voice a little too bright. I've lived in Hartford my whole life. Born and raised. How nice, one of the women said in that way that means the exact opposite. And what do you do, Veronica? Oh, I'm retired now, I said. I worked in insurance for 30 years. Processing claims, making sure everything was filed correctly. Nothing fancy, but it kept the bills paid and helped me raise Ethan after my husband passed. I watched them all do the same calculation. Single mother. Working class. Insurance clerk. I could practically see the thoughts forming behind their polite smiles. What is their daughter thinking? What is Vivian doing with this woman's son? Lawrence Blackwood entered the room then. A tall man with silver hair and the kind of confidence that comes from never having to worry about money. He greeted Ethan with a firm handshake and a clap on the shoulder, all hearty and masculine. Then he turned to me. Mrs. Patterson, he said, and at least he met my eyes. I understand you're in insurance? I said. Retired now, though. 30 years was enough. Indeed, he said, and I could see him losing interest already, his attention wandering back to the other guests, the ones who mattered in his world. We sat down to dinner in a dining room that could have seated 30. The table was set with china so delicate it looked like it might shatter if you breathed on it too hard. Crystal glasses caught the light from another chandelier. Flowers and candles created a centerpiece that probably cost more than my monthly electric bill in the house Ethan thought I lived in. I was seated between one of the Worthington men and a woman whose name I'd already forgotten. Ethan and Vivian were at the other end of the table, separated from me by 8 other guests. I saw Ethan looking at me worriedly, but I gave him a smile that I hoped was reassuring. The meal was served by actual servers, course after course of food that was beautifully prepared but honestly not as good as what I could have gotten at any number of restaurants I'd eaten at in New York or San Francisco or Paris. But I made appreciative noises, thanked the servers perhaps a bit too enthusiastically, and generally played the part of someone impressed and slightly overwhelmed by all this luxury. The conversation around the table was exactly what I'd expected. Stock portfolios and vacation homes, charity galas and club memberships, dropping names of people they knew and places they'd been. I stayed quiet, eating carefully, trying not to draw attention to myself. But Constance wasn't going to let me fade into the background. Oh no. She had a point to prove and I was going to help her prove it. So Veronica, she said during a lull in the conversation, her voice carrying down the table. Vivian tells me you still live in the house where you raised Ethan. How charming that you've stayed in the same place all these years. Everyone turned to look at me. I saw Ethan's face go pale. Yes, I said simply. It's a small place, nothing special, but it's home. I never saw the need for anything bigger. Just being me and Ethan. How practical, Constance said, and there was that tone again. I'm sure it's been quite an adjustment for Ethan, going from such modest circumstances to, well. She gestured vaguely around the room. Mother, Vivian said quietly, a warning in her voice. But Constance was on a roll. I only mean that it must be quite different from what he's used to. Our family has certain expectations, certain standards. We've worked very hard to maintain our position in society. Worked hard, I said, letting my voice carry just a hint of confusion. I thought you inherited most of it? The table went silent. You could have heard a pin drop on that expensive carpet. I saw Lawrence's eyes narrow, saw several of the guests exchange glances. But I kept my expression innocent, puzzled, like I just asked about the weather. Constance's face did something complicated. Our family has built and maintained our wealth through careful management and wise decisions. It's not simply about inheritance. It's about responsibility, breeding, knowing how to conduct oneself in society. Oh, I see, I said, nodding as if she'd just explained quantum physics to me. That's why you have all these rules about which fork to use and where to sit at dinner. I was worried I'd mess something up tonight. I saw Vivian close her eyes briefly. Ethan looked like he wanted to sink through the floor. But several of the other guests were smirking now, enjoying the show. It's not about rules, Constance said, her voice getting tighter. It's about culture, refinement, education. It's about understanding that certain behaviors and certain standards set people apart. Set them apart from who? I asked, still in that innocent, confused tone. From. She paused, searching for words that wouldn't sound as terrible as what she meant. From those who haven't had the same advantages. You mean from poor people, I said flatly. From working-class people like me. The table was so quiet now that I could hear the ticking of an antique clock somewhere in another room. Ethan was staring at his plate. Vivian was looking at her mother with something like horror. Lawrence had gone very still. I wouldn't put it quite so crudely, Constance said, but her mask had slipped. I could see the real her now, the woman underneath all the polish and pearls. I'm simply saying that Vivian comes from a certain background, and naturally we want her to be with someone who understands that world. Who fits into it. And you don't think Ethan fits? I said softly. I think Ethan is a lovely young man, Constance said, but her eyes said something different. But I also think that compatibility is about more than just affection. It's about shared values, shared experiences, shared social standing. So you think my son isn't good enough for your daughter? I said, and I let the knife show now, just a little. Because I'm not rich. Because I worked an ordinary job and lived in an ordinary house and couldn't give him the kind of advantages you gave Vivian. That's not what I said. Constance started, but I wasn't done. Actually, it's exactly what you said. You've just been using fancy words to say it. But let me be clear. My son is good enough for anyone. He's kind, intelligent, hardworking, and honest. He treats people with respect regardless of how much money they have. And if you can't see that, if all you can see is his bank account and his mother's old shoes, then maybe he's too good for this family. I stood up, my chair scraping against the floor. Thank you for dinner. It was enlightening. Mom, wait, Ethan said, standing too. But I saw something in his face. Not embarrassment now, but pride. Maybe even relief. Mrs. Patterson, please, Vivian said, and she was standing too now, her eyes bright with tears. I am so sorry. Mother, how could you? I was simply being honest, Constance said, but she looked rattled now, aware that she'd gone too far in front of witnesses who would absolutely gossip about this at their next social gathering. So was I said. And then I turned to Vivian, and I gentled my voice. Vivian, you seem like a lovely young woman. And I can see that you care about my son. But you need to decide who you are. Are you the kind of person who judges others by their tax brackets and their zip codes? Or are you the kind of person who sees past all that to what really matters? I looked at Ethan. Come on, sweetheart. Let's go home. He didn't hesitate. He came to my side, and we walked out of that dining room together, leaving a table full of shocked, silent wealthy people behind us. In the car, Ethan was quiet for a long time. Then he started to laugh. It began as a chuckle and built to a full, genuine laugh that made his whole body shake. "Oh my God, Mom," he said when he could breathe again. "Did you see her face? Did you see all their faces?" "I did," I said, and I was smiling too. "I can't believe you said that about the inheritance. I can't believe you asked who they were setting themselves apart from." He laughed again. "You were amazing." "I'm sorry if I embarrassed you," I said. "Embarrassed? Mom, I've never been more proud. You were right about everything. Vivian is wonderful, but her mother..." He shook his head. "I don't know if I can marry into that family, Mom. Not if they're going to look down on you, look down on us." "Let's see what Vivian does," I said quietly. "She's the one who matters here, not her mother." We drove home in companionable silence. When Ethan dropped me off at my small house, he hugged me for a long time. "I love you, Mom," he said. "Thank you for always being real. For not pretending to be something you're not just to impress people." If only he knew. Inside, I sat in my small kitchen and thought about what had happened. I'd gotten my answer about Constance. She was exactly what I'd suspected, old money snobbery dressed up in good manners. But Vivian was still an unknown. Would she side with her mother? Or would she choose love over social standing? My phone rang at midnight. It was a number I didn't recognize. "Hello, Mrs. Patterson? This is Vivian." Her voice was thick with tears. "Please, I need to talk to you. Can we meet somewhere? Just the two of us." We met the next morning at a small coffee shop in downtown Hartford. Not one of the trendy expensive places, just a regular neighborhood spot where the coffee was good and the atmosphere was relaxed. When Vivian walked in, she was dressed simply. Jeans and a sweater, minimal makeup, her hair in a ponytail. She looked young and vulnerable and nothing like the polished society princess from the night before. "Thank you for meeting me," she said, sliding into the booth across from me. "I wasn't sure you would." "Of course," I said. "I have nothing against you, Vivian. Your mother and I have different perspectives. But that's between me and her." "She was horrible to you," Vivian said, and tears started sliding down her cheeks. "I am so ashamed. I've spent the whole night thinking about what she said, how she treated you, and I'm so sorry." "It's not your fault," I said gently. "But it is in a way. I knew what she was like. I knew how she could be about anyone she considers beneath us." She said the words with bitter emphasis. "I've watched her do it to staff, to people at parties, to anyone who doesn't meet her standards. I told myself she'd be different with you because Ethan is important to me, but I was naive." "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "Because I need you to understand something." She looked up at me, her eyes red but determined. "I love your son. I love him more than I've ever loved anyone. And I don't care about the money, about the social standing, about any of it. I would give it all up tomorrow if it meant I could be with him." "Your parents wouldn't allow that," I said. "I'm 26 years old. They can't stop me." She took a shaky breath. "After you left last night, I told my mother exactly what I thought of her behavior. I told her that if she can't accept Ethan and his family, his wonderful, brave, honest family, then she can't be part of my life." "Vivian." "I'm not finished," she said, and there was steel in her voice now. "My father pulled me aside later. He said the same things you did, actually. He said that Ethan is a good man and that's what matters. He's not like my mother. He grew up poor himself, worked his way through college, built his business from nothing. He understands what you did, raising a son alone, making sacrifices. He respects it." "That's good to hear," I said. "I want to marry Ethan," Vivian said simply. "And I want you to be my mother-in-law. I want our children to know their grandmother. I want to be part of your family if you'll have me." I studied her face, looking for any sign of doubt or deception. But all I saw was sincerity, determination, and love. This young woman was willing to stand up to her mother, to risk her family relationships for my son. "Does Ethan know you're here?" I asked. "No. I wanted to talk to you first. I needed to apologize, needed to make sure you understood that I'm not like my mother. I'm not going to judge you or look down on you or treat you like you're less than. You raised an incredible man all by yourself. That makes you a hero in my book, not someone to pity or condescend to. Vivian, I said slowly, can I ask you something? Anything. If Ethan never makes more money than he does now, if we never have more than we have, will that be enough for you? Can you really walk away from the lifestyle you've always known? She didn't hesitate. Yes. I don't need the big house or the fancy parties. I need him. The rest is just noise. I believed her. In that moment, sitting in a coffee shop with this tearful, determined young woman, I believed her completely. Then you have my blessing, I said. And more than that, you have my support. If your mother gives you any trouble, you come to me. Okay. She reached across the table and grabbed my hands. Thank you. Thank you so much. We talked for another hour about everything and nothing. She told me about growing up in that big house, about the pressure and the expectations, about how she'd met Ethan and immediately felt like she could breathe for the first time. She told me about her father's support and her mother's coldness, about the friends who were really just social climbers, and the loneliness of being surrounded by people who only cared about your last name. I listened and I liked her more and more. She was genuine. She was kind. She was exactly what I'd hoped my son would find. When we parted ways, she hugged me tight. I'm going to make this right, she said. I promise. Over the next few weeks, Vivian proved her words with actions. She stopped going to her mother's social events. She refused to attend parties where I wasn't also invited. When Constance tried to plan an engagement party at the country club, Vivian said she'd rather have a backyard barbecue. Ethan was over the moon. He'd been prepared to walk away from Vivian if it meant protecting me from her mother's cruelty. Finding out that Vivian was willing to do the same thing, to choose him over her family's approval, only made him love her more. They got engaged 3 months after that disastrous dinner. The proposal was simple and perfect. Ethan took her to the park where they'd first met, and asked her to marry him with a ring he'd saved for months to buy. Not an expensive ring, not by Blackwood standards, but Vivian wore it proudly. Lawrence called me a week after the engagement. Veronica, he said, his voice formal but not unkind. I wanted to apologize for my wife's behavior. It was unacceptable. Thank you, I said carefully. I also wanted you to know that Vivian is cut off, he continued. Constance insisted. She said if Vivian is going to marry beneath her station, she can do it without family money. I felt anger rise in my chest. That's cruel. It is, he agreed. And I've told Constance as much. But she's stubborn. So I wanted you to know. I've set up a trust fund for Vivian that her mother can't touch. It's not the family fortune, but it's enough that they won't struggle. It'll activate when they get married. That's very kind of you, I said. It's the least I can do. Ethan is a good man, Veronica. You raised him well. I'm proud to have him as a son-in-law, even if my wife is too blind to see it. The wedding was planned for 6 months later. Vivian wanted something simple. Just family and close friends, a garden ceremony, a small reception. Constance refused to attend unless Vivian came to her senses. Lawrence would be there, walking his daughter down the aisle, but the mother-daughter rift remained. I watched Vivian struggle with this. No matter how strong she was, no matter how certain she was about Ethan, it hurt to have her mother reject her. I saw her crying sometimes, saw the way she'd stare at her phone hoping for a call that never came. That's when I decided it was time to stop playing my role. I invited Vivian to lunch, just the two of us again, at that same coffee shop where we'd had our first real conversation. When she arrived, I was waiting with a folder full of papers. What's this? She asked, sliding into the booth. The truth, I said. Vivian, I need to tell you something, and I need you to keep it between us until after the wedding. Can you do that? Of course, she said, looking confused. I pushed the folder across the table. I haven't been entirely honest about my financial situation. She opened the folder slowly, and I watched her eyes scan the first page. It was a summary of my investment portfolio: stocks, bonds, real estate holdings, everything. The total was at the bottom in bold numbers: $43,287,000. Her eyes went wide. I don't understand. I'm not a poor woman, Vivian. I never was. After my husband died, I decided to raise Ethan without the influence of wealth. I wanted him to understand the value of work, to appreciate what he had, to develop character instead of entitlement. So I lived modestly, saved and invested everything else, and let him believe we were just getting by. 43 million, she whispered, staring at the papers. Give or take, depending on the market, I said. I own the building where my insurance company had offices. I own a dozen other commercial properties. I have investment portfolios that would make your parents' financial advisor jealous. That small house Ethan thinks I live in? I own it outright, but I also own a penthouse in Hartford, a beach house in Maine, and a condo in San Diego. She looked up at me, her mouth open in shock. Why are you telling me this? Because you need to know who you're marrying into. Not for your sake. I know you don't care about the money. But because I'm going to give you a gift, and I need you to understand why. A gift. I pulled out another piece of paper. This is a letter of intent. After you and Ethan get married, I'm going to transfer $10 million into a trust for you both. Not because you need it, not because I think love requires money, but because I want you to have security. I want you to have choices. And I want your mother to know that you didn't marry down. You married into a family that's wealthier than hers. Vivian's eyes filled with tears. Veronica, I can't. Yes, you can. This isn't charity. This is me acknowledging that you loved my son when you thought he had nothing. You chose him over your family's money. You proved yourself. And now I'm going to prove something to your mother. What? I smiled, and it wasn't a kind smile. That the poor, naive woman she looked down on could buy and sell, her precious social standing 10 times over. That the working-class mother she tried to humiliate has more money than she's ever seen. And that her daughter made exactly the right choice. But Ethan doesn't know? Vivian asked. Not yet. I'm telling him after the wedding. I want him to marry you knowing exactly what he knows now, that we're ordinary people choosing love over money. I want your vows to be pure, untainted by any knowledge of wealth or inheritance. And then, as a wedding gift, I'm going to tell both of you the truth. Vivian laughed, then cried, then laughed again. You're amazing. You know that. I'm patient, I corrected. There's a difference. Does anyone know? About the money. My financial advisor. My attorney. And now you. That's it. I've spent 30 years keeping this secret, Vivian. 30 years living small so my son could grow big. And it worked. Look at the man he became. What about Constance? Vivian asked, and there was something fierce in her voice now. Are you going to tell her? After the wedding, I said. I'm going to pay her a visit. Just the two of us. And I'm going to have a conversation with her about assumptions, judgments, and the price of arrogance. Vivian grinned through her tears. Can I be there? No, I said firmly. This is between me and her. But I'll tell you all about it afterwards. I promise. The wedding day arrived with perfect weather. Sunny and warm, with a light breeze that made the garden flowers dance. Vivian looked beautiful in a simple white dress, elegant without being ostentatious. Ethan looked overwhelmed with joy, his eyes never leaving his bride. Lawrence walked his daughter down the aisle with tears streaming down his face, proud and heartbroken all at once. Constance's absence hung over the ceremony like a ghost no one wanted to acknowledge. I saw guests whispering, saw the sympathetic glances directed at Lawrence and Vivian. In their world, a mother missing her only daughter's wedding was more than just absence. It was a scandal, a statement, a wound visible to everyone. I sat in the front row wearing a dress I'd actually bought for myself. Still modest, still tasteful, but this one had cost $300 instead of $19. Baby steps toward revealing my true self. When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, when Ethan kissed his bride with such tenderness it made my chest ache, I cried. Real tears this time, not part of any performance. My boy was married to a woman who loved him truly, who'd proven herself worthy of him in every way that mattered. Everything I'd worked for, everything I'd sacrificed and planned and orchestrated, had led to this beautiful moment. At the reception, held in the garden of a lovely venue that Vivian had chosen specifically because it felt warm and intimate rather than grand and imposing, I pulled the happy couple aside during a quiet moment. I have something to tell you both, I said, my heart pounding. And a wedding gift to give you. Mom, you already gave us those beautiful dishes from the registry, Ethan said, his arm around his new wife's waist. You didn't need to get us anything else. I laughed, nervous energy making my hands shake slightly. The dishes were just the registry gift. This is something entirely different. Can we go somewhere private for a few minutes? We found an empty room in the venue's main building, away from the music and laughter. Ethan and Vivian sat together on a small couch, holding hands, looking at me with curious, slightly concerned expressions. I took a deep breath. This was it. The moment I'd been both anticipating and dreading for 3 decades. Ethan, I began, my voice steadier than I felt. I need to tell you something about our family finances. Something I should have told you before, but I had my reasons for waiting. He frowned, immediately worried. Is everything okay? Are you having money problems? Because now that I'm married, Vivian and I can help. No, sweetheart. Listen to me. I pulled out the folder I'd shown Vivian months earlier, updated now with current figures. My hands trembled slightly as I handed it to him. I haven't been entirely honest with you about our financial situation, about who I really am. He opened the folder slowly, his expression confused. I watched his face as he scanned the first page, watched confusion turn to shock, shock turn to disbelief. His mouth closed, opened again. No words came out. This can't be right, he finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. Mom, this says you're worth over $43 million. $43.6 million as of last week, I confirmed, my voice quiet, though it fluctuates daily with the market. He stared at me like I'd suddenly grown a second head, like I was a stranger wearing his mother's face. But how? You worked in insurance. We lived in that tiny house. You drove a Honda that was older than me. You clipped coupons from the Sunday paper. I did all those things, I agreed, sitting down across from them, because I wanted to raise you without the corrupting influence of wealth. I wanted you to learn the value of hard work, the importance of humility, the kind of character that only comes from genuine struggle. And it worked, Ethan. Look at the man you became. You've been lying to me? He stood up abruptly, the folder falling to the floor, papers scattering across the carpet. My entire life? Letting me take out student loans when you could have paid for my entire college education with pocket change? Watching me stress about rent and bills and car repairs when you're a multimillionaire? His voice was rising, anger and hurt mixing in equal measure. Vivian put a hand on his arm, but he was too upset to be calmed. Yes, I said simply, meeting his eyes. Because if I'd paid for everything, if I'd given you everything, you would have become someone different. Someone who never learned to work for what he wanted. Someone who felt entitled to things he didn't earn. Someone who couldn't appreciate the real value of a dollar or understand the struggles of ordinary people. That wasn't your choice to make. His voice cracked with emotion. I'm an adult. I deserve to know the truth. I deserve to make my own choices about my life. You were 13 when your father died, I said quietly, my own eyes filling with tears. You were a grieving child. And I made the choice I thought was best for you. Maybe you disagree with it now, and I understand that. But I stand by every decision I made. You knew. Ethan turned to Vivian suddenly, betrayal flashing across his face. You knew about this? Vivian stood too, her hand still on his arm. She told me a few months ago. And she asked me to keep it secret until after the wedding, Ethan. She wanted us to marry for the right reasons. The right reasons? He laughed bitterly. What, so you could test me to see if I'd marry you without knowing about the money? No, I said firmly. So you could marry her knowing that she loved you when she thought you had nothing. So your vows would be pure, untainted by the knowledge of wealth. So that years from now, when you look back on today, you'll know beyond any doubt that what you have is real. Ethan was breathing hard, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. I'd known this moment would be difficult. I'd prepared myself for his anger. But seeing the hurt and confusion in his eyes was harder than I'd imagined. Ethan, I said softly, standing to face him. I know you're angry. You have every right to be furious with me. But answer me this honestly. Would you be the same man if you'd grown up rich? Would you have worked as hard, cared as much about doing things right, treated people with the same respect regardless of their bank accounts? He didn't answer immediately. I could see him thinking, processing, his jaw working as he tried to reconcile the mother He thought he knew with this new reality. And would you have known, I continued gently, truly known in your heart that Vivian loved you for you? Not for your money, not for your connections or your lifestyle, but for the person you are. He looked at his wife, and something in his expression began to soften. She was crying now, tears streaming down her face, her hand still resting on his arm like an anchor. That's why you did the test with my parents, he said slowly, understanding dawning. Why you played poor at that dinner party. You wanted to see who they really were. I needed to know, I confirmed. More importantly, I needed to know who Vivian was. Would she choose you over her family's money? Would she stand up to her mother's snobbery? Would she love you when she thought you had nothing? I did, Vivian said quietly, her voice thick with tears. I do. And your mother's gift isn't really about the money, Ethan. It's about giving us choices, security, freedom. It's about making sure we never have to compromise our values or our love for financial reasons. Ethan sat down heavily, his head dropping into his hands. For a long moment he just breathed, trying to process everything. Vivian sat beside him, her arm around his shoulders, and I stood there feeling helpless, waiting. This is insane, he finally said, his voice muffled by his hands. This is completely insane. My whole life has been a lie. Your whole life has been authentic, I corrected gently. The struggles were real. The lessons you learned were real. The person you became is real. The only lie was about how much money was sitting in accounts you didn't know about. What else? He asked, looking up at me with red-rimmed eyes. What else haven't you told me? I took a deep breath. I own a penthouse in downtown Hartford. That's where I actually live most of the time. I have a beach house in Maine and a condo in San Diego. I sit on the board of directors for 2 Fortune 500 companies under my maiden name. I've been managing my investments and properties through various LLCs and trusts for years. The insurance company I worked for? I owned the building. And starting today, $10 million is being transferred into a trust fund for you and Vivian. He stared at me, speechless. The number hung in the air between us like something physical. $10 million, he finally whispered. Consider it your inheritance given early, I said. Use it to buy a house, start a business, travel the world, invest it for your children's future, or donate it all to charity. I don't care what you do with it. It's yours free and clear. I don't know what to say. His voice was barely audible. I don't even know who you are anymore. That hurt more than his anger. I felt tears spilling down my own cheeks. I'm your mother. That's never changed. Everything I did, every choice I made, every secret I kept. It was all because I love you more than anything in this world. I wanted you to have the best possible life. Not the easiest life, but the best one. One where you understood struggle, appreciated success, and could see people for who they truly are rather than what they have. Your mother gave you the greatest gift anyone could give, Vivian said, kneeling in front of him and taking his hands in hers. She gave you character. She gave you values. She gave you the ability to see through pretense and superficiality. That's worth more than any amount of money could ever be. Ethan pulled her close, burying his face in her shoulder. I watched them hold each other. These two people who'd found real love in a world that often confuses wealth with worth. And I felt both pride and profound sadness. I need time, Ethan said finally, looking up at me. His eyes were red but clearer now. To understand this, to process it all, to figure out how I feel about everything. But Mom. He paused, took a shaky breath. I love you. I'm angry and I'm confused and I feel like my whole world just tilted sideways, but I love you. That hasn't changed. I love you too, I said, fresh tears streaming down my face. So much. More than you'll ever know. Just give me some time, okay? He asked. Take all the time you need, I assured him. I'll be here when you're ready to talk. We rejoined the reception, though Ethan was quieter than he'd been before, clearly lost in thought. I saw him watching me differently now, studying me like I was a puzzle he was trying to solve. It would take time, I knew. Trust, once bent, needs careful tending to straighten. But we'd get there. We had to. The next morning I woke early in my penthouse. I stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out over the city, and prepared myself for what I was about to do. Then I went to my Real closet, the one filled with designer clothes and expensive shoes, and chose my armor carefully. I selected a Chanel suit in navy blue, classic and understated but unmistakably expensive. Louboutin heels that added 3 inches to my height. A Cartier watch that cost more than many people's cars. Harry Winston diamond studs in my ears. I had my hair done at the salon I actually used, the one where appointments cost $300. Professional makeup that made me look polished and powerful. When I looked in the mirror, I barely recognized myself. I'd been in costume for so long that my real self felt like the disguise now. But this was who I actually was. A woman who'd built an empire through intelligence, hard work, and strategic thinking. A woman who'd played the long game and won. I drove to Blackwood Manor in my real car. A Mercedes S-Class that I kept in a private garage downtown. The drive felt different this time. I wasn't nervous or playing a role. I was simply going to have a long overdue conversation. The butler who answered the door actually took a step back when he saw me, his professional composure slipping for just a moment. "I'm here to see Mrs. Blackwood," I said crisply, my voice carrying the authority I used in boardrooms. "Tell her Veronica Patterson would like a word. Now." He disappeared into the house, and I could hear muted conversation from somewhere inside. A few minutes later, Constance appeared in the foyer. She stopped dead when she saw me, her hand flying to her throat, her eyes going wide with shock. "Surprised?" I asked pleasantly, stepping inside uninvited. "I imagine I look quite different from the last time we met. What are you doing here?" Her voice was tight, uncertain. "And what are you wearing?" "Chanel," I said, smoothing the jacket. "Spring collection from 2 years ago. Though I'm sure you recognized it immediately. You have good taste, Constance. I'll give you that much." "I don't understand." "No, you don't. That's exactly why I'm here." I walked past her into the sitting room where we'd first met, the room where she judged me and found me wanting. This time I sat down in the best chair, the one that was clearly hers, the throne from which she'd surveyed her little kingdom. "Shall we have a conversation? Just the two of us, woman to woman." She followed slowly, her face pale, her usual confidence shaken. "If this is about the wedding." "Oh, it absolutely is about the wedding," I interrupted. "Among many other things. You missed a beautiful ceremony, by the way. Your daughter looked radiant. Your husband cried. Your absence was noted by everyone, and believe me, they were all talking about it. In your social circles, that kind of gossip spreads fast." I couldn't support her decision to throw her life away on. She caught herself, but not quickly enough. "On what? On a poor man? On someone beneath her station? On my son?" I leaned back in her chair, perfectly comfortable now in this space that had once been meant to intimidate me. "Please finish your sentence, Constance. Let's have some honesty between us for once." "This is my house," she said stiffly, still standing. "You can't just walk in here and—" "Sit down, Constance," I said, and there was steel in my voice now. The voice I'd used to negotiate million-dollar deals, the voice that made executives twice my size nervous. "We're going to have a very frank discussion, and you're going to want to be sitting down for it." She sat, perched on the edge of her chair like a bird ready to take flight. Her hands were shaking slightly, and I felt a surge of satisfaction at seeing her discomfort. "Let me tell you a story," I began, crossing my legs elegantly. 30 years ago, I was newly widowed with a 13-year-old son in medical debt that would have destroyed most families. I could have declared bankruptcy, could have started over with nothing, could have lived on government assistance and sympathy. But I didn't. Do you know why? She didn't answer, just stared at me with growing apprehension. Because my husband had taught me about finance, about investing, about long-term strategic planning, about the power of compound interest and carefully chosen real estate investments. So I took every single penny I didn't absolutely need for basic survival, and I invested it. Carefully, strategically, ruthlessly. I leaned forward, watching her face. I bought my first rental property within a year of his death. Then another. Then another. I worked in insurance, yes, but not processing claims like some underpaid clerk. I was an executive. I climbed that corporate ladder aggressively, working twice as hard as any man in the room. I sat in boardrooms with men who thought a woman couldn't possibly understand complex financial instruments, and I made them look like children playing with monopoly money. I don't believe you, she whispered, but I could see the doubt in her eyes. You don't have to believe me. Numbers don't lie, Constance. I pulled out my phone and brought up my portfolio summary, then held it out to her. Take a good look. Go ahead, I'll wait. Her hand shook as she took my phone. I watched her eyes scan the screen, watched the color drain from her face as she saw the numbers. The investments. The properties. The total net worth figure at the bottom. $43.6 million, I said softly. Give or take a few $100,000 depending on the day's market fluctuations. That's what the poor, naive working-class woman you look down on is actually worth. She looked up at me, speechless, my phone still clutched in her trembling hand. So when you sat at that dinner table, I continued, my voice hard now, and made your snide comments about my modest circumstances and my working-class background, when you implied that my son wasn't good enough for your daughter because he didn't have money, when you looked at my worn shoes and my discount dress and decided you knew everything about me, you weren't just wrong, Constance. You were spectacularly, embarrassingly, pathetically wrong. Why didn't you say something? She finally managed, her voice barely above a whisper. Why did you let me? Why did you pretend? Because I wanted to see who you really were, I interrupted. I wanted to know if you were the kind of person who judges others by their clothes, and their zip codes and their bank account balances. And you showed me exactly who you were. You failed the test so completely it was almost impressive. This isn't fair, she said, and there was something desperate creeping into her voice. You tricked me. You came into my house pretending to be something you weren't. I came into your house being exactly who I am. I cut her off sharply. A woman who values character over appearance, substance over status, integrity over image. You're the one who made assumptions. You're the one who saw worn shoes and a homemade casserole and decided you knew my entire worth as a human being. You judged, and you were wrong. I stood up, looking down at her now. She seemed to have shrunk somehow, the imperious society matron reduced to just a frightened woman realizing the magnitude of her mistake. But why? She asked, and her voice actually cracked. Why go through all this elaborate deception? Why the test? Because I needed to protect my son, I said simply. I needed to know if Vivian loved him for the right reasons. I needed to see her character tested. And I needed to teach you a lesson you clearly never learned from all your privilege and education. That money doesn't make you better than anyone else. Just makes you richer. And being rich without character, without kindness, without the ability to see the humanity in people regardless of their economic status, that makes you poor in all the ways that actually matter. I walked toward the door, then paused and looked back at her. She was still sitting there, looking lost and small in her own grand sitting room. Oh, and Constance, there's one more thing you should know. I smiled, and it definitely wasn't kind. I've transferred $10 million into a trust fund for Ethan and Vivian. Your daughter, the one you cut off, the one you said was marrying beneath her station, is now wealthier than she would have been staying in your good graces and waiting for her inheritance. She chose love and she got everything. She chose character over money, and she ended up with both. You can't, she started, but I held up my hand. I can, and I did. The paperwork was filed yesterday. They'll have full access to the funds next week. I adjusted my Chanel jacket. You missed your daughter's wedding because of your pride and your prejudice. You lost her because you couldn't see past your own narrow definitions of worth and value. And now she's wealthy, happy, and married to a good man who will treat her with the respect and love she deserves. While you're sitting here alone, bitter, and finally realizing that you threw away your relationship with your only child for absolutely nothing. I left her there, frozen in her expensive sitting room, surrounded by all her beautiful things that suddenly seemed terribly empty. I walked out through that marble foyer, past the crystal chandelier, out the door and down those stone steps. I got into my Mercedes and drove away from that mansion with its cold perfection and colder heart, and I felt lighter than I had in years. When I got home to my penthouse, I poured myself a glass of very expensive wine and called Vivian. How did it go? She asked breathlessly, picking up on the first ring. About as well as could be expected, I said, settling into my favorite chair by the windows. She knows the truth now. All of it. What did she say? How did she react? Not much, honestly. I think I broke her a little bit. I took a sip of wine. Sometimes the truth is the most devastating weapon there is. How's Ethan doing? Still processing everything, Vivian said. We talked most of the night. He's starting to understand why you did what you did, but it's going to take time. He's hurt that you didn't trust him with the truth sooner. But he also admits that he probably would have been a very different person if he'd grown up with money. I know it'll take time, I said. I'm prepared for that. I just hope he can forgive me eventually. He will, Vivian assured me. He loves you, Veronica. That's never been in question. He just needs to adjust to this new reality. And honestly, I think part of him is relieved. He's been worried about money, about affording a house, about whether we'd be okay when we have children. Now those worries are gone. Good. That's what I wanted, for you both to have security and choices. Veronica. Vivian's voice went soft. Thank you. For everything. For testing me, for trusting me with the truth, for giving us such an incredible gift, for seeing me as more than just a spoiled rich girl. I'll never forget what you did. You earned every bit of it, I said. You chose love over money, kindness over status, character over comfort. That's rare, Vivian. Especially in the world you come from. You're exactly the daughter-in-law I hoped my son would find. We talked a while longer, and after we hung up, I sat in the growing darkness of my penthouse, looking out over the city lights, and felt something close to peace. A week later, Lawrence Blackwood called me. Veronica? It's Lawrence. I was wondering if we could meet for coffee. Just the two of us. We met at a nice cafe in Hartford the next morning. Not too fancy, not too casual, neutral territory. He was already there when I arrived, and he stood when he saw me, his eyebrows rising slightly at my appearance. This was the real me, after all, not the costume I'd worn to his house. You look different, he said, a slight smile playing at his lips. This is how I actually look, I replied, sitting down across from him. The other version was purely for your wife's benefit. He laughed, a genuine sound that transformed his face. Constance told me about your visit. She's been locked in her room for 4 days straight. Won't talk to anyone, won't eat properly. I'm actually starting to worry about her. I'm not sorry, I said bluntly, meeting his eyes. Neither am I, he replied, surprising me. She needed a wake-up call. Several wake-up calls, actually. She's been getting progressively worse over the years, more and more obsessed with status and appearances and social hierarchy. I've tried to talk to her about it, but she wouldn't listen to me. You did what I couldn't do. You showed her the real cost of her arrogance and prejudice. She lost her daughter over it, I said quietly. She did. He looked down at his coffee cup, his expression sad. And maybe if we're very lucky, this will be the catalyst that finally forces her to change. Though I'm not holding my breath. Constance has always had trouble admitting when she's wrong. We sat in silence for a moment, the cafe bustling around us. I wanted to meet with you to apologize again, Lawrence continued. And to tell you something important. What? I've updated my will and all my estate documents. Vivian was already going to inherit half of everything, but now I've made it absolutely clear that Constance's behavior, opinions, or ultimatums cannot affect that in any way. Regardless of what my wife says or does, Vivian will inherit exactly what she's owed. And I've set up additional trust funds that Constance has no access to and no control over. That's between you and your daughter, I said carefully. I know, but I wanted you to know that your son married into a family that will support them. Not financially. You've clearly got that more than covered. He smiled wryly. But emotionally, practically, as family should. I'll be there for them. I'll be the grandfather their children need, the father-in-law Ethan deserves. I may have failed to control my wife's behavior, but I won't fail my daughter or her husband. I felt warmth spreading through my chest. Thank you, Lawrence. That means more than you know. Ethan needs family, especially now that he's processing some difficult truths about his own mother. He told me, Lawrence said gently, about your revelation at the wedding. For what it's worth, I think you did the right thing. Maybe not the easy thing, but the right thing. You raised a man of genuine character, Veronica. That's the hardest thing to do, especially with money. Most wealthy parents fail at it completely. I've seen it dozens of times. But you succeeded. At what cost, though? I asked quietly. He's so hurt right now. So angry and confused. He'll come around, Lawrence assured me. Give him time. He's a smart young man. He'll realize eventually that everything you did was out of love. I hope so. I also wanted to ask your advice, he said, leaning forward, about bringing Constance around, helping her see what she's lost. You clearly understand psychology, strategy, human nature. How do I help her? You don't, I said simply. She has to come to that realization herself. All you can do is maintain your own relationship with Vivian and Ethan. Show Constance what she's missing by not being part of their lives. Maybe eventually she'll wake up and understand what her pride has cost her. Maybe she won't. But that's her choice to make, not yours to force. He nodded slowly, absorbing my words. You're a remarkable woman, Veronica. I wish we'd met under different circumstances. We met under exactly the circumstances we needed to, I replied. Your wife's snobbery revealed everyone's true character, including mine, including Vivian's. And that needed to happen before they got married. Over the next several months, life slowly settled into a new normal. Ethan gradually came to terms with my deception, helped along by therapy sessions and long conversations where I explained my reasoning in painful detail. It wasn't easy. There were arguments, tears, moments when I thought I might have damaged our relationship beyond repair. But slowly, gradually, understanding began to dawn. I still wish you trusted me with the truth sooner, he said one evening over dinner at my penthouse, the first time he'd visited my real home. He looked around at the expensive art, the designer furniture, the view that had cost 7 figures, and shook his head. But I'm starting to understand why you didn't. And honestly, Mom, I probably would have been insufferable if I'd grown up rich. Not insufferable, I said gently. Just different. Softer maybe. More entitled. Less empathetic to people's struggles. I wouldn't have understood what it's like to worry about rent, he said thoughtfully, or to stress about student loans. I wouldn't have worked as many hours or learned to budget so carefully. I wouldn't have developed the same relationship with money that I have now. Exactly, I said. Those struggles made you who you are. They gave you perspective and character. But they could have been easier, he pointed out. I could have had help, support, without turning into a spoiled brat. Maybe, I conceded. But I couldn't take that risk. You were too important to me. Your character, your values, your essential goodness. I couldn't risk losing that to wealth and privilege. He was quiet for a long moment, then reached across the table and took my hand. I forgive you, Mom. For the secrets, for the test, for all of it. I understand now why you did it. And I'm actually grateful. Because if you'd raised me differently, I might not have become someone Vivian could love. Someone worthy of being Claire's father. Wait, Claire? I looked at him in confusion, and he grinned sheepishly. We were going to wait to tell you, but Vivian's pregnant. We're having a girl. We're going to name her Claire after Grandma. I burst into tears right there at the dinner table, overwhelmed by joy and relief and love. My son was going to be a father. I was going to be a grandmother. And despite everything, despite all my secrets and tests and manipulations, we were going to be okay. When little Claire was born 8 months later, I held her in my arms and felt a completeness I hadn't known I was missing. This tiny, perfect person with her father's eyes and her mother's delicate features represented everything I'd worked for. She would grow up with advantages I deliberately denied my son, but she would also grow up with the values he'd learned from struggle. She would understand that money is a tool, not a goal. That character matters more than bank accounts. That kindness costs nothing but means everything. Mom, Ethan said, pulling me aside at the hospital while Vivian slept with baby Claire in her arms. I want to say something, and I need you to really hear me. Okay, I said, my heart suddenly pounding. I forgive you. Completely and totally. I understand now, really understand why you did everything you did. And I'm grateful. Because if you'd raised me differently, I wouldn't be who I am today. I wouldn't have the values that attracted Vivian to me. I wouldn't be the kind of father Claire deserves. His eyes were bright with tears. You were always worthy, Mom. You just helped me see it in myself. And that's the greatest gift any parent can give. I hugged him tight, this man who would always be my little boy, and felt years of guilt and worry finally lifting from my shoulders. 2 years passed. Claire grew into a bright, cheerful toddler. Ethan and Vivian bought a beautiful home. Not a mansion, but a warm, welcoming place with a big backyard. Vivian started a non-profit organization helping single mothers with job training and childcare support, pouring her heart and considerable resources into making a real difference. Lawrence was a devoted grandfather, showing up for every milestone, every birthday, every small moment. And Constance sent cards for birthdays and holidays, generic messages that said nothing and meant less. Then one afternoon, Vivian called me, her voice shaking. "It's Mom. She's in the hospital. Cancer. Stage 4. Dad says it's spread everywhere." We went to the hospital together, Vivian and I, holding hands like we were bracing for battle. We found Constance in a private room, looking small and fragile in a way I'd never imagined her. The proud, imperious society matron had been reduced to a sick old woman, and despite everything, I felt a pang of sympathy. Lawrence was there, his face haggard with worry and grief and exhaustion. He looked like he'd aged 10 years in the weeks since I'd last seen him. "Thank you for coming," he said to Vivian, pulling her into a tight hug. "She's been asking for you. I wasn't sure you'd come, but I'm so glad you did." Constance's eyes opened when we entered, and she looked at her daughter with an expression I couldn't quite read. Regret? Longing? Fear? "Vivian," she whispered, her voice weak and raspy. "You came. I wasn't sure. I didn't think." "I'm here, Mom," Vivian said, rushing to her bedside and taking her hand. "I need to say this while I still can." Constance struggled to sit up, and both Vivian and Lawrence moved to help her. "I need you to know. I was wrong. About everything. About Ethan, about you, about what matters in life. Mom, you don't have to." "Yes, I do. Please." Constance's eyes filled with tears. "I let my pride and my prejudices poison the most important relationship I had. I missed your wedding. I missed meeting my granddaughter. I missed 2 years of your life because I was too stubborn to admit I was wrong. And now..." She gestured weakly at the monitors in 4 lines. "Now it's too late." "It's not too late," Vivian said through her tears. "I'm here. We're all here. That's what matters." Constance looked at me then, really looked at me for the first time since that confrontation in her sitting room. "Veronica, you tried to teach me that night at dinner, and then when you came to my house, you tried to show me what I was losing, what really mattered. I should have listened. I should have been better. Can you forgive me?" she asked, her voice barely audible, her eyes pleading. I thought about all the pain she'd caused. The judgment, the snobbery, the cruelty disguised as concern. The way she tried to make me feel small, tried to convince her daughter that my son wasn't good enough. The 2 years she'd missed of Claire's life because of her stubborn pride. Part of me wanted to say no. Wanted to let her face the end knowing she'd failed in the ways that mattered most. But I looked at Vivian's desperate face, saw the plea in her eyes, the hope that somehow, in these final moments, her mother could find redemption. And I thought about my granddaughter, about the stories she'd hear one day about the grandmother she never really knew. "I forgive you," I said quietly, moving closer to the bed. "But more importantly, Constance, you need to forgive yourself. You made terrible mistakes. You let pride and prejudice blind you to what was really important. But you're acknowledging that now. You're finally seeing the truth. That takes courage, even if it came too late." "Thank you," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you for giving me that grace." She turned back to Vivian. "I have a letter for you. In my desk at home, top drawer. I wrote it last week when they told me how little time I have left. Read it after I'm gone. And please tell Claire about me. Tell her the truth, that her grandmother was flawed and foolish, that I learned too late what really matters. But tell her I loved you, that I always loved you, even when I was too proud to show it properly." She died 3 weeks later, with Vivian and Lawrence by her side. The funeral was everything Constance would have wanted. Formal, elegant, perfectly orchestrated. The church was full of society people who'd known her for decades, all performing their grief for an audience of their peers. But I also saw real mourning. Lawrence, broken by the loss of his difficult, complicated wife. Vivian, crying for the mother she'd had and the mother she'd always wished for. And even me, mourning not for who Constance was, but for who she could have been if she'd learned her lessons sooner. After the service, after the reception, after all the obligatory social rituals were complete, Vivian came to my penthouse. She was exhausted, her eyes red from crying, still wearing her black dress. "She left me this," she said, pulling an envelope from her purse. "The letter she mentioned. I can't read it alone. Will you stay with me?" We sat together on my couch, the city lights twinkling outside the windows, and Vivian opened the envelope with shaking hands. The letter was several pages long, Constance's elegant handwriting filling each page. "My darling Vivian," she read aloud, her voice trembling. "By the time you read this, I'll be gone. And I'll have left this world knowing I failed in the most important way a mother can fail. I didn't support you when you needed me most." She paused, wiping her eyes, then continued. "Veronica Patterson taught me a lesson I should have learned long ago. That wealth and status mean nothing compared to character and love. Your husband is a good man. He comes from a good family, better than ours in the ways that actually matter. I was too blind to see it, too invested in meaningless social hierarchies to recognize real worth when it was standing right in front of me." Vivian's voice broke, and I put my arm around her shoulders. "I missed your wedding because of my pride. I missed the first 2 years of my granddaughter's life because I couldn't admit I was wrong. I threw away precious time with you because I cared more about appearances than about love. What a fool I was. What a terrible blind fool." She had to stop reading for a moment, overcome with emotion. I held her close, letting her cry. "Please forgive me, darling. Please tell your husband I'm sorry. Tell your mother-in-law that she won, not because there was ever really a competition, but because she understood from the beginning what I only learned at the end. Tell Claire about me, but tell her the truth. Tell her that her grandmother loved you but let pride get in the way. Let her learn from my mistakes." Vivian's hands were shaking so hard she could barely hold the letter. "And Vivian, my beautiful girl, live your life with love and authenticity. Don't make my mistakes. Don't let social pressure or fear of judgment keep you from the people who matter. Value character over credentials, love over luxury, substance over status." Veronica was right about everything. I just wish I'd been brave enough to admit it sooner. "I love you. I'm so proud of you. I'm so sorry, Mom." We sat there in silence for a long time, holding each other while Vivian cried. When she finally spoke, her voice was hoarse but somehow lighter. "She understood," Vivian said softly. Finally, at the end, she understood what really mattered. "Sometimes understanding comes at the end," I said gently. "Sometimes that's when we're finally ready to see the truth without our pride getting in the way." "I'm going to keep this letter," Vivian said, carefully folding it. "And when Claire is old enough, I'm going to let her read it. So she knows that even good people make mistakes, that pride can blind us, but that it's never too late for growth and understanding." Over the following years, life blossomed in ways I'd never imagined. Ethan and Vivian had 2 more children. A boy they named Daniel after his grandfather, and another girl they named Hope. Claire grew into a bright, curious child who asked endless questions and had her father's kind heart. Lawrence became the grandfather all 3 children adored, the one who showed up for school plays and soccer games, who told stories and gave piggyback rides, who loved without condition or reservation. He and I became friends, genuine friends, united by our love for our shared family. Ethan thrived in his career, eventually starting his own company, funded in part by the trust I'd established, but built on his own vision and hard work. He never forgot the lessons he'd learned growing up without wealth. His company culture emphasized work-life balance, fair wages, and treating everyone with dignity regardless of their position. Vivian's nonprofit grew into a nationally recognized organization, helping thousands of single mothers find stable employment and childcare. She poured her heart into the work, honoring in her own way the struggles I'd faced raising Ethan alone. And me? I gradually stepped back from my business obligations, spending more time with my grandchildren, teaching them about money and character, about the difference between being rich and being wealthy in the ways that truly matter. One afternoon, when Claire was 7 years old, she climbed into my lap with a serious expression on her face. "Grandma," she said solemnly, "Mommy told me you used to pretend to be poor. Why did you do that?" I looked at my granddaughter's intelligent, curious eyes and decided she deserved the truth. "Because I wanted your daddy to learn important lessons," I said. I wanted him to understand that people are valuable because of who they are, not what they have. I wanted him to work hard and appreciate what he earned. I wanted him to be kind to everyone, not just to rich people. Did it work? She asked. Look at your father, I said. What do you think? She considered this seriously. Daddy is really nice to everyone. He always says please and thank you even to waiters and store people. And he works really hard. Exactly, I said. That's what I wanted. But you have lots of money now, she pointed out with a child's simple logic. Does that make you a different person? No, sweetheart. The money never changed who I was inside. It just changed what I could do, what choices I had. But the important parts, kindness, honesty, treating people well, those things have nothing to do with money. She nodded, satisfied with this explanation, then looked up at me with those wise young eyes. I'm glad you're my grandma. The real you, not the pretend poor you. I hugged her tight, my heart full to bursting. On Claire's 8th birthday, at a party in Ethan and Vivian's backyard, I stood at the edge of the celebration watching my family. Ethan flipping burgers on the grill, laughing with Lawrence. Vivian organizing games for the children, her face glowing with happiness. Claire and her siblings running through the grass with their friends, shrieking with joy. This was what I'd worked for. This was what all the secrets and sacrifices had been about. Not the money in my accounts or the properties in my portfolio, but this 3 generations of family, built on love and values and genuine connection. Ethan came over and stood beside me, following my gaze. You did good, Mom, he said quietly. I know I was angry at first and it took me a long time to understand. But you did good. Look at what we have. We did good, I corrected. You became exactly the man I hoped you'd be. That was your choice, your character. I just tried not to mess it up too badly. He laughed and put his arm around my shoulders. You know what's funny? All my life I thought we were struggling, thought we were just getting by. But we were never poor in the ways that mattered. We had love. We had each other. We had everything important. Yes, I said softly. We did. And now we have all of this. He gestured at the party, at his children playing, at Vivian laughing with some of the other mothers. Money, security, comfort, but we also still have the important things. The values. The character. The love. That was always the goal, I said. To have both, but to know the difference between them. To understand that one is a tool, and the other is everything. Later that evening, after the party had ended and the guests had gone home, after the children were in bed and the house was quiet, I sat in my penthouse looking out at the city lights. My phone buzzed with a text from Vivian. Thank you for everything you've done for our family. Not just the money but the wisdom, the example, the love. Claire asked me tonight if her great-grandmother Constance would be proud of who we are. I told her yes, I think she would be. Because we learned from her mistakes and your wisdom. We're building something beautiful. With love and gratitude, Vivian. I read the message 3 times, tears streaming down my face. This was redemption. Not just for me but for Constance too. Her mistakes had become lessons. Her pride had become a cautionary tale that helped her grandchildren understand the difference between worth and wealth. And my secrets, my elaborate test, my 30 years of playing poor, it had all led to this. A family united by love, strengthened by struggle, enriched by prosperity but not defined by it. Now, as I sit here telling you this story, those grandchildren are growing up. Claire is 10 now, already showing signs of her grandmother's business acumen, but with her father's kind heart, and her mother's fierce commitment to helping others. Daniel is 8, thoughtful and gentle with an artist's soul. And Hope is 6, bold and bright and curious about everything. They're growing up with advantages I deliberately denied my son, but they're also growing up with the values he learned from going without. They understand that money is a tool for doing good in the world, not a measure of their worth as human beings. That dinner at Blackwood Manor, where I walked in wearing a $19 dress and carried a cracked casserole dish, changed everything. It revealed truths that needed revealing. It tested people who needed testing. It set in motion events that led to growth, understanding, redemption, and ultimately, a love strong enough to span differences of wealth and class and expectation. Would I do it again? Without hesitation. Because the truth, no matter how you arrive at it, is always worth pursuing. And love tested is love proven. Did I do the right thing? I've asked myself that question 1,000 times over the years. Did I manipulate people unfairly? Did I play games with real emotions? Did I have the right to test Vivian the way I did, or to keep the truth from my son for so long? I don't have perfect answers, but I know this: my son is happy. His wife loves him truly and proved that love when it mattered most. My grandchildren are growing up with both security and values, and a family that could have been torn apart by class prejudice and judgment is instead united by understanding and love. Constance learned her lesson too late to save her relationship with her daughter, but not too late to leave behind wisdom for her grandchildren. Lawrence found the courage to prioritize love over social standing. Vivian chose authenticity over inheritance. And Ethan became the kind of man who values character over comfort. That's enough for me. More than enough. So I ask you, did I do the right thing? Was I wrong to test them, to hide my wealth, to let my son struggle when I could have made his life easier? Or did I give him the greatest gift a parent can give? The chance to build real character, to develop genuine empathy, to understand that true worth has nothing to do with bank account balances? Tell me in the comments what you think. Would you have done the same thing if you were in my position? Have you ever had to prove yourself to someone who underestimated you? Have you ever been judged by appearances only to reveal a truth that changed everything? And if you've ever felt looked down on, judged by your clothes or your car or your address, know this: your worth isn't measured by your possessions or your portfolio. It's measured by your character, your kindness, your capacity to love and be loved. Never let anyone make you feel small because they think they're bigger. Never let anyone convince you that wealth equals worth. The richest people I've ever known had almost nothing in their bank accounts. And the poorest people I've ever known lived in mansions. Real wealth is in your relationships, your values, your integrity, your ability to see the humanity in everyone regardless of their circumstances. That's what I tried to teach my son. That's what he's teaching his children. And that's what Constance finally understood at the end of her life, that she'd been rich in all the wrong ways and poor in all the ways that mattered. Learn from our story. Test carefully but test honestly. Value character over credentials. Choose love over luxury. Build wealth if you can, but never let it define you. And remember that the most expensive lessons are often the ones that cost nothing but pride. Thank you for listening to my story, for walking this journey with me from that first dinner at Blackwood Manor to this moment of reflection and peace. I hope it made you think. I hope it touched your heart. I hope it reminded you that appearances can deceive, that assumptions can destroy, and that real love tested and proven, is the most valuable thing we can ever possess. Did you like my story? Which part moved you the most? Was it the moment I confronted Constance in her mansion, revealing the truth she'd been too blind to see? Was it Ethan's anger and eventual understanding? Was it Constance's deathbed confession and the letter she left behind? Or was it something else entirely? A moment that resonated with your own experience of being underestimated or having to prove your worth? Tell me in the comments. Share your own stories of being judged by appearances. Let me know if you've ever had to test someone's character before trusting them completely. And if you disagree with my methods, tell me that too. I'm not perfect. I made mistakes along the way, hurt people I loved, played games that might have gone terribly wrong. But I did what I thought was right, what I believed would give my son the best possible chance at a meaningful life. Don't forget to subscribe for more real-life stories about love, family, betrayal, redemption, and finding your strength when the world tries to diminish you. Stories about ordinary people facing extraordinary choices, about the masks we wear and the truths we hide, about the price of pride and the power of authentic love. With love, respect, and the hard-won wisdom of 30 years keeping secrets, Auntie Helen Stories.